Welcome to the CodePrep Podcast, the podcast that shows you how you can get into tech. Today, we have the honor to have Carolyn Stransky as our guest. Carolyn is a JavaScript developer located in Germany. She is a front-end developer, technical writer, bootcamp graduate, speaker, teacher, and in her free time, she is an organizer for BerlinJS. She has a degree in journalism. So let's get started. Carolyn, can you share with us how you got into tech from journalism?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. So I got into tech in kind of a really roundabout way. So I moved to Germany in 2015, right after I graduated from my degree in journalism, because my boyfriend lives here. So I didn't really have a plan for kind of what I was going to do for a living. And turns out it's really hard to, one, be a journalist, and two, be a journalist in a foreign country where you don't speak the language. A little difficult. So I tried freelancing for a while. I'm not really self-directed enough to do that. So I eventually landed a job in a marketing role at a tech startup that was doing work in blockchain. And from there, I kind of jumped between different startups, and eventually I was kind of like, maybe my life would be a little bit more stable, kind of emotionally, financially, job security, if I became more technical. I didn't necessarily think I was going to become a developer. I thought like, being more technical, learning to code, it could help me be a better marketer. It could help me maybe go into tech journalism in a very real, tangible way. And so after one of the startups that I was working for went under, I decided to do a coding boot camp. And then, and after that, I became a technical writer for a while and then kind of rounded out into a developer. So, so I've been in tech for a few years, but I've only been a developer for one. So.
Oh, very cool. So you said you did a boot camp.
Yes.
How did you choose your boot camp? What did they cover? Are you doing what they did in that boot camp? How did you get from, I think I'll do a boot camp, to here?
Yeah, of course. So when I decided, or like when I thought I wanted to do a boot camp, it seemed like a right decision for me because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not very self-directed. So trying to learn on my own was really a struggle, and being able to, I never seemed to be able to devote the time when I was working full-time to learning. It's the same way, that's why I don't speak German very well. But so I decided to go with a program that's in Berlin called Spiced Academy. At the time, I don't know the prices now, but at the time it was much more affordable than maybe a program in London or in the US. And because I'm from the US originally, so I also looked into that. And there we were doing full stack JavaScript development, which right now I'm only focused on front end, so I do half. But I think, I don't know, I got a lot out of the boot camp. I'm not sure exactly what you want to know, but it was an
we've had this discussion before about how a good boot camp doesn't teach you JavaScript, it doesn't teach you .NET, it doesn't teach you a language, it teaches you coding logic. And so I try to remind people that even if your boot camp covers something and a role calls for something else, it doesn't mean you're excluded from that role if you learned the basics. And it sounds like you took a lot from your boot camp and have now moved into a role that suits you.
Oh, totally. I was actually kind of shocked at how prepared I was going into my development role because I didn't go into the boot camp thinking I'm going to come out of this a developer. I never thought that while I was in it. So it was really, and I think when you have that attitude, it's hard to really think about how you're processing logic, to think about how, because I was really debugging? Do I really need to focus on this? I don't know if I'm going to do it. So I was surprised at how much of that still stuck with me, even if I wasn't necessarily tunnel vision towards it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's perfect. One of the questions I'd like to follow up with is, you have a background in journalism, and you tried to do freelance journalism, then you decided to go into tech, and then you thought about doing technical writing. What is your perspective on doing technical writing for somebody like yourself that has like a journalism background? What opportunities are there for people to pursue in that area if they're interested in doing that?
Yeah, of course. I think technical writing and writing kind of, yeah, go hand in hand by the nature of the name. But I also think that there's kind of this new wave in documentation. And I mean, I'm a little biased because I'm very like deep into the documentation community, but it's a really good time to be a technical writer because I think people are now focusing, they're realizing that just throwing documentation online and kind of having it be really robotic and stiff doesn't work. And that there are a lot of people who are maybe, yeah, self-directed learners or just wanting to learn in their free time. And so the documentation is really crucial for that. And I think having a journalism background is really nice because, yes, you can write a clear sentence, but you learn how to be very concise with journalism, and you also learn how to kind of like tell a story. And while technical writing and documentation, you're not interviewing people, you're not like writing out like this long-winded intro, but you are like crafting someone's journey through the documentation and through this new product. And I think what is also great I found in the documentation community is that it's a really nice community. Like, it's not a ton of people. Sometimes the JavaScript or front-end community gets a little overwhelming because there's so many people and they have so many opinions. So many opinions. And I think that the documentation community is really sweet because it's very supportive and we're all kind of working towards the same goal. And it's easy to find support within that network.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so in the intro, we mentioned speaking, which is near and dear to both mine and Jennifer's heart. How did you, well, first of all, decide, hey, I'd like to speak at events, and what have you done? Tell us about that journey.
To be honest, I can't remember exactly how I got into speaking, like what the moment was that I was like, oh, this would be a good idea. But I do remember someone telling me that, like, if I do like this kind of storytelling aspect and I don't mind being like public speaking and being on stage, then speaking at conferences could be a really fun way to go to more events, like have it be an affordable thing because I was like, I can't really shell out like hundreds of euros or dollars on tickets. And I mean, you get to travel, which is really nice. And so I did my first speaking thing at Write the Docs, which is a documentation conference. It's in Prague and Portland. I was at the Prague one. And they have these like 5-minute lightning talks that are spontaneous. So they're not necessarily like picked before in a CFP. You just like write down your topic, put it in this big bowl, and then, whoever's the, person who, one of the organizers chooses it out of the bowl if they think it fits into the topic. And I made the mistake of I was on the train to the event with a few other people, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to do a lightning talk. I have a really good idea. I mean, I'm pretty sure it'll be okay. Turns out the guy who was choosing the lightning talks was like sitting across from me, and he was like, oh, you think? Yeah. So then I was kind of accountable for doing it. So, and it really just kind of snowballed from there. I realized that being interested in documentation had a really nice pull in the front end community because it's something that a lot of people want to do better but don't know how. So that's where I've kind of found my niche. So I mostly talk about documentation and I also talk about self-care, but that's more shorter.
Those are two great topics that I think everybody needs to have. When you decided to go in and do speaking, one of the things you've also have done is you've also been a teacher and you've organized a meetup or an event, we call them. What would you encourage people that are looking to get into tech to get involved with social organizations like that, like monthly meetups, speaking at conferences, teaching? Has that helped you from your perspective, getting into tech, and is it a path that you would recommend others to do?
Yes, 100 times yes. So when I go back to my boot camp, for example, for the graduation, and people ask like, what can I learn? What can I do? You know, they're all like new grads. They're really nervous. They just want to like know how to get into the scene. And I mean, I'm speaking for the Berlin community because I mean, I know it might be different in other cities, but for instance, in the Berlin tech community feels like you know, small village. Like it's huge, but you see the same people over and over again, and especially if you're in a certain kind of niche. And also, we have a big startup community. And the startup community is pretty intertwined. You meet people who know people who do this. So it's the perfect opportunity for definitely people who are looking for jobs to meet people and then be able to reference that later. Like when I was first looking for my first developer job, one of the things I did that made my application stand out was I would meet people from companies that I wanted to apply to at meetups. And then or see them speak at a meetup. I didn't even need to talk to them, which was great. And I would write that in my cover letter. Like that would be the opening of my cover letter was like, oh, it was really cool seeing XY developers speak at this event. You know, it got me really interested in your organization and now I'm applying. I mean, okay, probably a little more eloquent than that, but
whatever.
But it worked really
Paraphrasing
well.
yourself. No, that's actually that is one of my things that I preach from the rooftops is you can send out 1,000 resumes all day long, but meeting people is how you get work. It's the people that you know and reference and, you know, preach, sister.
And
I love that you casually. Oh, no, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's also something if people, you know, when you're going into speaking that I found really nice because then you don't have to approach people, they come to you.
Introverts unite.
Yes.
Yay, introverts!
Introverts unite separately from different houses quietly. But yeah, okay, so I'm going to go back because you casually threw out something that I think is monumental, especially for people going through boot camps, in the job hunt, trying to move up a career ladder. You casually threw out that you talk about self-care. But that's huge. What aspects do you hit and what you know, what do you see as particularly important in the realm of self-care for new developers?
I'm so glad you asked about this. I was really hoping you would because I love this topic because I think tech is a really interesting space. Like it was something I really didn't expect when I joined because I didn't study it. I'd never had any interest in tech until kind of being thrown into it because it's the only way to speak English in Berlin. And people are really into it, which I think has, you know, some positives and negatives. It's really great that people are so passionate about what they're doing and kind of involved wholeheartedly. But at the same time, I think that can create like a really toxic culture for people who might just, you know, like who need that kind of space between their work and their life, or maybe don't have the time to devote to, you know, spending all of their time learning the hottest new thing or doing open source. So the reason I started talking about self-care was I really wanted to advocate for those people who maybe feel all of this like FOMO and pressure to do all these things when really like it's okay. And I mean, I'm saying that as someone who I don't always like think that. I always get trapped into the like, oh, I should be doing this, or what if I do this? That's how I end up doing so many things. But I think it's important. I mean, taking care of like our minds and like our own anxiety, especially if you do, you know, deal with anxiety or depression or something similar. And also what I've learned lately, like very recently, is you really need to take care of your body. Like I have developed the past year, like kind of problems with my neck or my back from sitting so much because my job before, I was never sitting so often in one place. I was kind of running around and doing some other stuff. So literally moving my body is something that I should have thought about. And also my hands. I'm really into developers getting manicures, literally obsessed because I mean, we always think about like, oh yeah, programming is it's all in the mind. It's something that we have to think logically and do these things, but like we are a physical human that has a body that is doing these things. So all realms, but I don't know. I like this topic a lot.
Agreed.
It's definitely a vital topic because it's something that impacts everybody that's in tech. That you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your mind, you have to take care of the stress and the requirements and the demands on you from a daily basis on that. I like your perspective of making sure that you do manicures because you've got to take care of your hands because if you're a programmer, it's how you program is through your hands, you know? And if you're going to get a manicure, I mean, why not get a massage and a pedicure and a face pill and everything else while you're there? So I think it's a good perspective to have on that. Um, as an American living in Germany, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what it's like for females in tech there? Is it, because here in the States, it's made, a big issue out of the fact that females are in such a small minority in tech. Is it the same perspective there in Germany? Is there challenges that people face being a female in tech there?
In Berlin, I would say yes. I think there are naturally going to be organizations that are making efforts to do better or to be more inclusive. But I think the problems that exist in the US, I could imagine also happen here. It's one of those kind of uniting factors among women in tech. I think that's why, speaking at least from my own experiences, it's been a lot more like natural to make connections with women at other tech conferences or to see them at events because you go through the same things. And I've noticed that even like I have a friend who works for a more traditional German company and she runs into a lot of the same issues that I do over in startup land. Things like, trying to be taken seriously and people kind of underestimating like what you can do, what your commitments are. I've heard people who are doing their job hunt, maybe in their early 30s, and the topic of like, but what about your family? About this? Like, they can't legally say it, but they can totally bat around it. And or even I've like had some friends who have the issue of being kind of the token woman, like they've been hired onto this team and they want to create this kind of community, maybe like a diversity guild, maybe hire more women in their organization and get kind of shut down because it's just like, oh yeah, we have one. It's totally fine. So I think a lot of those problems exist everywhere. And I think that's why it's really important to be kind of mindful. But I think what's nice is that, and this is another thing that I did when I was applying, was that if there are women on the engineering teams that you want to apply to, most of the time, if you message them and ask what the work culture is like, people will be really honest. As long as they're not the recruiter or I guess maybe like the team lead or something that's hiring for that position, I found that other women are incredibly honest about their circumstances at work or maybe some of the pros and cons of it. So that's nice.
It always goes back to going to humans over the internet. Yeah. There's so much you can learn from a 20-minute coffee conversation with an actual employee who will actually tell you what to expect. Genius.
And that's also the thing with startups is like, you see like there's so many people who have all these different opinions about, because people have good and bad experiences at startups. Startups grow at different rates. So, my experience, for example, at my company might be very different than someone who worked there 4 years ago when they were just starting. So I think it's important to, kind of at least get like some personal perspective if you can, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been really interesting. Thank you for sharing your journey and your advice, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really like, I can't wait to do this. It'll be a new experience. So
Oh, you should come back on after you speak and give us the
yeah.
after. That like, here's how I prepared, here's how it went, here's the debrief.
Yeah, that would be great because, man, I know there's going to be like a lot of lessons learned throughout this whole experience. So I'm so open to sharing that.
And you know, Gatsby has been voted the fastest growing framework right now.
Really.
I mean, it's just growing incredibly fast. So sorry to interrupt, Valerie, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
What is Gatsby? I've heard this word. What is this? Is this a front end thing?
Yeah, it's a front-end framework. So
You wouldn't understand.
I mean, yeah, no, that's fair. So, since we're in advice mode, talking about, you know, how to give a talk, can you give us your one recommendation or piece of advice or, you know, thing that you love, something in your life you wish you'd known about 10 years ago, something that makes your life easier? It can be literally anything from a way of thinking to an actual product to a process, but anything that you feel like makes you more able to handle work and life and learning and everything. What makes your life easier that you can recommend to our listeners?
oh my gosh. Okay, what pops to mind right now is this book that I read called A Mind for Numbers. I actually like have it right here. This was not planned, you guys. I just literally have the book. It's this book, A Mind for Numbers, by a woman, Dr. Barbara Oakley. So anyways, she basically says that yes, like learning math and science might be hard for some people, but like you just need to have the right learning practices in place and you can really learn anything. And she offers this her own like example of like she herself was horrible at math and science as a kid, but now she's like a professor in engineering and is an author and just extremely successful. So I think that having that mentality, the growth mindset mentality that you can learn anything and actually knowing like how to learn and what techniques you need to use in order to learn a topic. I wish that I knew that, especially like when I was in college, because in college, whenever I ran into like a hard course that I could not break through, I was like, okay, I can't do this. And I would like switch to something else instead of actually just changing my habits, you know? So,
Yeah. I think that's really normal, especially as women. We are socialized from a very young age to be perfect. There's this great TED Talk that was given on this. I wish I could remember. I'll have to look that up and put it in the show notes. But basically, you know, we're all raised as young ladies. One, we're told that we're bad at math. We're told from a young age. The first time I ever raised my hand in an elementary school math class was in 5th grade. I had literally never had a question ever. I raised my hand to clarify what was just said, not even to ask a question, just to make sure I'd heard it right, and was greeted with a pat on the shoulder and, sweetheart, girls just aren't good at math. Like, we're also taught from a very young age that if we can't do something perfectly, we just shouldn't do it at all. We should just move on. And I saw that a lot with the women in our cohort at the boot camp. How many of us sat there in front of blank editors, and if we couldn't bang out a perfect function that did exactly what we wanted the first try, we just stared at it. Yeah.
this is
No, I think that one of the things that I love about, you know, me now versus me a year ago is, you know, now when I have 32 broken builds in a row and I'm looking through my error logs, it's like, wow, I knew 32 different ways to break that. I thought of 32 different things to try that didn't work, and I'm still going, but I tried something that wasn't perfect and I kept going. So I really admire that you identified that, and, you know, you're sort of working within a new sort of framework for how to learn, and realizing that it's not a problem if you're not perfect from minute one. You just adapt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love that.
So on point.
One of the other things we ask our guests to recommend is we want to encourage people to get into tech. And the last hurdle that they face to get into tech is the process of going through the job interview, which is quite different from any other job in the world. So based on your experience, can you make a recommendation for our listeners on how to prepare for the job interview for somebody that wants to get into tech?
Yes. Okay. So I think it is important to like know the basics of like the particular language that you use, whether that's like JavaScript or Ruby. You got to know the basics of that. And what I think is really helpful is whatever job you're going for, try to get to know somebody that's in that role or that's like adjacent to that role, so they can give you advice on what the interview is like and what to expect. Because going in blind makes the whole process like so hard. It's already hard, but if you can have somebody who's like, oh yeah, keep an eye out for this, be prepared to discuss that, that is such a huge, that's a really helpful way to go about it. What else? Also, definitely be prepared for like a negative experience. It's gonna happen, but just like bounce back from it, take some notes about what you missed during that interview and learn it and move forward with it. It's gonna take practice. I still need to practice interviewing, even though I have a job, like this is something that I need to continue to practice. So yeah, it's there's no like, I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like there's no finish line. You know what I mean? It's just like, this is your way of life now, just learning a new thing and proving to people that you know the thing, and then building with the thing, and then doing it all over again. Oh gosh.
Definitely. You've said several things throughout this interview, and as long as I've known you, you have a lot of the typical traits of extremely bright people. And
Thanks.
so if you feel this way, the beautiful thing about technology for people who are very bright is that we're always challenged. There is no boredom. There's always something we don't know, we've never heard of, a new mountain to climb, a new thing to frustrate us, and give us that challenge that can be so elusive, especially during the school years where we get C's because we're bored. But I don't know. Like I completely agree with everything you just said. There is no finish line. There is no after. It's just, this is the new course we build forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing with us what you've built thus far. It's been amazing. I really wish you will come back after Refactor and give us
absolutely
all the details on that experience. We will probably have links in the show notes to Refactor, to the speakers page, and some of the other things we've mentioned in this episode. But you are such an inspiration, Alicia, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey with our listeners.
Thank you guys. Oh, I love talking to you guys.
Oh, virtual hug. Until next time.